Hi, and welcome to The Curling Show, the podcast that brings you interviews with the sport's top athletes and the people who shape the game, supported by listeners who make secure donations at thecurlingshow.com. I'm Dean Gemmel, and in this edition, it's our annual conversation with one of the sport's media pros. He's a writer, he's an editor, he's a publisher, he's a blogger, he's an Olympic Silver Medalist, and he's the former Media Relations Officer for the World Curling Federation. George Karrys, welcome back to The Curling Show.
Thank you, Dean. Glad to be here yet again.
Well, we usually do a wrap-up of the season just past, George, and we'll do some of that for sure, but I think that this time around we might start with a look ahead to an important Olympic year for curling. My feeling is that the Olympic season, this one, might be just a bit of a bellwether in that it's curling's fourth go-around as an official Winter Games sport, and maybe we start to find out if the buzz continues to grow every year, every cycle, or if we're going to plateau at some point. What do you think?
I would agree with that. I think the evidence has shown the last couple of Olympic or post-Olympic cycles after those years, in Japan and Salt Lake and Turin, that there was a huge rise in interest and then a gradual ebb for the last couple of years before the next games. And this is indeed pivotal. I think every market is different. Canada, for example, has got to take a look at urban markets and possible visible minority areas as well. They can't, sit on their laurels and say we got the most curlers in the world, because the reality is the population is growing and curling needs to grow, even in a country like Canada. And for European countries, France and Germany are two areas identified by the WCF as needy areas just because they've been around so long in the world curling family, and there's been essentially zero or negligible growth for the last few years.
Yeah, that's an interesting point in that I think it seems like it's definitely the established countries that have gained the least from the Olympics.
Yeah, exactly. And one country that kind of sits in the middle, at least in my own mind, is the United States. They hosted just about 8 years ago, and they got a huge boost after that, and I think generally they're still going pretty strongly. I think they can look back to prior to Salt Lake and say that they've grown by leaps and bounds. But what's the next level for them? What's the next level for U.S. curling?
Well, I would say as a U.S. curler, U.S.-based curler, that we're somewhere in between. Not quite. Perhaps we're considered an established curling country, but I don't really think we have the numbers there. But we have had really good buzz from every Olympics, and it's partly I think because we've got. Last go-around there was so much coverage on CNBC, and if that happens again, I think we can expect to see big numbers at open houses. What do you think clubs should be doing in Canada? Let's start there and elsewhere to capitalize on the Olympics.
Well, it's so our sport is so tough. In Canada, the pivotal events, like many, are World Championships. In the case of Canada, the Brier and the Scotties, the national championships. This is the Feb-March to the early April time of year, and of course. Curling ends May 1st, boom, gone. All the clubs are closed, and people are still trying to phone up and take a corporate group out or arrange their own bonspiel, or they just want to walk in and try it. So I really think the key is to kind of interrupt league play during the Olympic Games in February. And I don't mean cancel the whole thing and just leave the club empty apart from people ready to accept walk-ins. But, if you've got a 6-sheeter, run 5 sheets, for every league that you've got. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, etc. And that open sheet, you give 2 teams to buy, have those players come out to the club and be prepared to, deal with people who have walked in that day or have phoned in and made an appointment to try curling.
We always do battle this thing where the penultimate events in curling are at the end of the season, and then by the time it's time to recruit members, a lot of that interest is gone. And I don't... I tend to agree with you during the Olympics. I just wonder how much, because I'm not in Canada at that time of year, just how much additional interest in the game is created with the Olympics versus, people see the Brier, they see the World Championships. It's not like it is here where seeing the curling on TV is somewhat unique. Yeah,
it's absolutely huge in Canada here during the Olympics, Dean. You wouldn't believe it. That's where we're pulling in more people who've never considered curling in their lives, visible minorities, etc., particularly in the big cities. They phone in and they walk in. And again, that goes back to my earlier comment that Canada can't afford to sit on its laurels, knowing that it is the biggest curling nation in the world without growing at the domestic level.
What do you think? There's some talk that I guess you're in the camp that Canada is maybe no longer the center of curling in the world. I tend to disagree with that, but maybe you're just saying it's ebbing a bit.
No, I agree with you. Canada still is number one for sure, and it goes beyond things like infrastructure and numbers to the actual performances. I mean, how soon after this past championship season do people forget that Canada's men and women won back-to-back golds in 07 and 08, right? And of course you look at 09, and there's a silver medal from Kevin Martin, and a quote shocking off the podium appearance from Team Jennifer Jones, finishing fourth. But hey, these things happen. Look at all the medals Canada has scored in a variety of disciplines across the board over the last 3 years of this non-Olympic this Olympic quadrennial, if you will. There's a reason they're ranked number one in the World Curling Federation rankings heading into Vancouver.
Well, and even those WCF rankings don't take into account the fact that Canada has a number of teams that can go to a World Championship and win, whereas other countries might have one or at best two.
Exactly.
Any predictions on who's going to first wear Canada's colors at the Games and second wear the gold medals in Vancouver?
No, I honestly don't think I'll be doing a prediction unless I'm, asked to by another media outlet coming close to the trials.
Another media outlet more prestigious than the curling show.
Well, most definitely.
Yes. I think it's wide open again, to be honest. I think Canada's so tough to win.
Take a look at the men's champs for the Olympic Games the last 3 times. You have Kevin Martin in 2002, but who at the time would have expected Mike Karrys in 98?
Especially with Karrys at lead.
Yeah, some guy, right? But take a look at Brad Gushu, even with Russ Howard coming in last minute to help his team out. That team was ranked, again, got to be ranked between 8th and 10th out of 10 teams at those trials. So 2 of our 3 Olympic reps of the past were completely unexpected.
Yeah, and it's the field may be a little there may be a little more distinction. Maybe I think those 4 teams that pre-qualified are maybe have distanced themselves a bit, but not a ton, really. I don't think.
Yeah, it all depends on who is hot going into the event, who's got the experience, and of course all those those factors that just kind of bounce around, and nobody can really pin down what makes a winner on one day versus another.
The game is just so tough at the high performance level, and sometimes I don't know if we do the best job in curling of making people aware of that. I hope we can do a bit of that in the Olympics. You talked on the curlingnews.blogspot.com. You mentioned the Globe Mail's Steve Brunt declaring on Bob McCown's primetime sports show on the Fan 590 in Toronto that curling has the most difficult qualifying procedure of all Olympic sports in Canada. I think there's a real story for curling to tell in that, to go to the Olympics in Canada and the United States, you have to win. And there's just a lot of sports where that's not the case. Yep.
Brunty said it right, and for a guy who doesn't cover curling very much, he hit the nail right on the head. And of course he comes from a background of focusing on so many other sports, including professional sports. And it's quite easy, when you think about it, to look at curling and say, hey, what a great story to tell. We do have potentially the toughest qualifying procedure of all the Olympic sports, and maybe in any game, summer as well as winter.
And the one that offers such a stark contrast. I mean, at the end, in both the U.S. and Canada, you have to flat out win to get to the Olympics, and it's going to come down to one game, and at the end of that game, there's going to be one team beside themselves with joy, and another team wondering how they'll possibly even find a way to play the game again.
Well, I know the Canadian Curling Association would have it no other way. They've always said win to get in has been the focus of the Olympic qualifying process up till, what's going to follow after Vancouver. Despite the fact that there's so much pressure from other sources like the Canadian Olympic Committee, the people running the Own the Podium massive funding program, who take a look at other countries like Great Britain, i.e. Scotland, of course, that are appointing players to form a 4 or 5 person team. So there's always extraneous pressure on Canada to, take a look at all avenues and possibly make changes in non-Olympic years. But so far Canada has, the CCA, to their credit, have realized this has got to be a win-to-get-in proposition. Plus the fact that only in Canada can you have a trials competition that is actually going to, command a tremendous rights fee, have great TV coverage, and make the organizers some money.
Exactly. They can't walk away from that franchise. But I think in a world where people think sports has gone a bit soft or it's tainted by things like steroids or whatever else, I think that curling has a great story to tell in this. And I think it requires a real concerted effort to make sure, the media gets this story and writes about it.
Well, if there's any year that the media is going to get it, it's in an Olympic year at a Games where we're the hosts in Canada. It really doesn't get any better than this. The opportunity is here right now. I mean, every Olympics they bring in some writers, some senior columnists who really don't cover a sport very much. Like Dave Perkins of the Toronto Star is a great example. fantastic writer, can basically choose whatever he wants to write about. And he always makes his way to the curling venue every 4 years on Olympic Games and, spends a good solid 5 or 6 days immersed in this world of curling, if you will. But what are these guys going to write about, on home turf in Vancouver that everybody else isn't writing about already, about the sport of curling, right? So maybe this is the opportunity to dig a little deeper, ever deeper, and into stuff that, is usually the domain of curling media, like the Curling News or Sweep Magazine.
Yeah, and I really hope that this year we can, and it started to happen, in the last couple cycles with help from people like you and some other people, but to really reinforce the notion that the curlers in the Olympics are as much athletes as anybody else out there. We're talking about players who are fit by and large, and there's still a few exceptions. But you look on the ice at a high performance event or like at the trials, you're not going to see many players who aren't fit, and even the one and not truly athletic. And again, I think that's a stumbling block for me in Canada. Canada has all the history, but you also have some of the baggage, don't you?
Very true. And again, that is definitely a story that's going to head to top drawer during Vancouver. And during the Paralympic Games, too, for that matter, of fitness of the competitors. I'm sure of it. And, Dean, come on, you know something about fitness and curling.
Yes, indeed I do, George. That was a clumsy lead-in, but there will be a book coming out, which I'm a co-author with one of the top players, on fitness in curling and how to train for curling, and really talking a lot about how important fitness is in the sport. I imagine even the great Ed Wernick, who was not a disciple of fitness, we might say. I imagine if he played in this era, he might even be seen in a gym.
Eddie would really be confounded by what's going on now. I mean, as readers of the Curling News know, we did a 3-part feature interview with Eddie that was actually conducted the previous summer, and he just let fly every issue at a variety of targets.
It's great.
I mean, it was classic old Eddie. I know a lot of people enjoyed it, but he did, if I recall, he did mention the whole fitness finagle that went on. And, Eddie more than a few times was caught, ruining the fact that it's not just about fun and teammates and having a good time anymore. It's become a bit of a business. And, of course, this speaks right to where curling is right now as a consequence of the Olympic movement, the Olympic program.
Well, I should add that even this book does have a chapter on finding a better balance. I don't think we want to turn our sport into a total business and everybody in the gym and nobody spending any time in the bar after a game either.
Dean, you send me a copy of that book. The Curling News will give you a review. Okay?
All right. Hey, you've spent the last couple years traveling around the world with the World Curling Federation. And you were at all the World Championships, most of the World Championships, I guess, this year. Your thoughts across the board on them, from mixed doubles to World Seniors? What do you take away?
Well, there's still amazing differences to me at events that are part of the CCH Season of Champions, like the Ford Worlds when they're held in Canada and Worlds held outside of Canada. Really remarkable differences. And no wonder the athletes love coming to Canada to compete in Canadian-based championships, because they've got the crowd, they've got the infrastructure, they've got a fully staffed medical and physio room waiting for them. It's truly amazing. From my media perch, it's always a struggle to get fans to come out to events. There are some pockets around the world that are really good for the sport of curling and might even be seen as growing. Some areas of Switzerland, for example, the Basel area, get some pretty good crowds for curling. Asia is a really interesting market, and I'm pretty fortunate in my tenure with the WCF to go to 2 World Women's Championships in Asia, in Amori, Japan, a couple of years ago when Kelly Scott won, and of course last year in Korea. And it's amazing to see what can happen with the potential of Asia. And the board of directors at the WCF, if they ever let anyone into their boardroom discussions, there's a great excitement level for the potential of Asian curling. And so much is being talked about television. I assume you, Dean, heard, and you probably talked about this a little bit with Dan Raphael in a recent episode, about the millions, tens of millions of curlers who are watching both the World University Games in Harbin and, of course, the Women's Worlds in Korea.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess I agree with all that there's certainly opportunity just on population alone, but I guess what confounds some people is when you see an event like the Women's in Korea and there's nobody in the stands, you kind of wonder what's going on over there.
Well, there were some people in the stands. I want to refute some of the Canadian media that said there were not. There wasn't much during mornings and afternoons, but in the evenings there were some pretty decent crowds. The opening weekend was great. The final weekend was great. In a lot of ways, the pattern of attendance didn't differ much from what we have in other curling markets and sometimes in the smaller markets in Canada, where it's the night draws that really draw the people out. Take a look at that entire situation in Korea. There were no real tickets for sale per se. There was a certain area of primo seating that they tried to sell some corporate packages to, but other than that, it was free attendance. It's all about exposure in the Asian market. It's all about introducing people to a mysterious sport they rarely see and don't understand, certainly not in person. And if heads are turned and the literature is taken away and there's more walk-ins at the few curling clubs in these countries, then the sport's all the better for it.
Hey, talking about another world event, the World Juniors were in Vancouver last year at the 2010 Olympic venue. Your thoughts on both the event itself and the arena, which has received something less than glowing reviews from some people?
Well, there were actually two test events there. Prior to the juniors, of course, the World Wheelchairs were there, and that was the first test, if you will, of the curling venue for next year's Olympic and Paralympic season. Really good venue. Things still being put together. The ice is going to be absolutely fantastic. Some people who've been around the sport for a while, have been real fans of the sport, may recall that there has been some criticism of Olympic ice in previous games, just in terms of a straight factor. I don't think there's going to be any such conditions like that, not just because of the ice techs in Vancouver, but also the power behind the building itself. The actual mechanics are absolutely amazing for both curling and what's to come afterwards, which is going to turn into a swimming venue, I believe, for the city of Vancouver.
And a curling club too there, right? There's...
Absolutely. That's where the VCC, the Vancouver Curling Club, is moving into. I think they're going to have 8 sheets, and that's going to be a fantastic multi-purpose legacy facility after the games. But overall, both the wheelchairs and the juniors, very well-run events. The officials are all on board for Vancouver 2010. They were part of the test as well. Pretty much the same people are going to be involved next year. Although it's an event that is independent of the CCA and to an extent even the WCF, the IOC runs their own championship, the Olympic Games. There are some core people involved, including Neil Houston and his team out in Vancouver itself, who of course worked for many years with the CCA on the event side, who are going to make sure that this is an amazing show, both from a television perspective, all the requisite sponsor perspectives, and potential for the development of the sport both in this country and outside.
Honestly, I think the arena will be great for ice. From what I've read, I think the only criticism stems from the fact probably that teams from outside of Canada were hoping for something like in Edmonton in 2007 at the Men's Worlds with playing in front of 18,000 people, and that's not going to happen just because the arena is not that big.
That's right, and we knew that for years. An initial hope, was for 15,000 or so seats, and then it went down to 10, and now it's down to, I think it's somewhere between 6 and 4. The reality is it's going to look great on TV. It's going to be loud as heck. I heard they're changing to bucket seats from the benches if they keep the steel or metal assembly of those seats. Then people are going to be kicking and stomping on them as well as blowing horns and clapping and cheering, and it's just going to be the loudest thing you've ever heard. It's going to be quite amazing.
Should be good, I think. I'd agree. I think we know curlers like to critique a lot of things, so I think it'll work out well. Hey, the Asham World Curling Tour and the Capital One Grand Slam season. How do you rate the year just passed for the Capital One Grand Slam series, and what do you see for that series of events going forward?
I think Randy Furby's win in the Players' Championship was right in the nick of time. I think it had been quite a lot of the Glenn Howard versus Kevin Martin show on the men's side, as you can imagine. Great to see the Furb stick his nose in there and qualify for the trials direct against all odds, if you will. Interesting to see, Kevin Cooey sort of maintain his place, I think, considered in the top 5, although he had a few less wins this year and a few less final appearances. Good to see some of the young guns come on, like Mike McEwen again and Reed Carruthers. On the women's side, bit of a hodgepodge, I guess. Variety of winners. Jennifer Jones started off, a bit slow, really picked it up around, I think, December, January. And then, of course, I'm not sure what people expected of her at the Players' Championship, having a disappointing finish in terms of the standings in Korea at the Women's Worlds. And then she just came out and pretty much stomped everybody to win another Players' Championship.
Right. I did find that a bit surprising. Well, not surprising. I don't. You can't count out that team ever. I mean, they win Scotty's Tournament of Hearts through tiebreakers, so I don't think you can ever count them out.
I don't think you can. And, that team didn't look particularly good against Glenn Howard at that skins experiment, the Battle of the Sexes again. But, man, not only are you playing against men, but you're playing against a team like Howard, on these immaculate conditions in such an ultra-aggressive format.
Yeah, I mean, they're playing a team that you could take a good B-level team in Canada, a men's team, and they play Glenn Howard, and they feel foolish too.
Yeah, exactly.
What about the Capital One Cup? What do you think? Do you think that did a whole lot?
Well, I'll tell you what. There's nothing wrong with getting more money into the sport.
Yep.
I shock some people when I show them old money lists from the 80s and maybe even the 70s and the 60s, and you realize that the money hasn't really gotten that much bigger or better. There's a couple of one-off cash deals. One used to call the World Open in Calgary that gave, and of course the Moncton 100 awarded $60,000 to the winning teams.
Right.
And of course in the 90s there was the phenomenon of the Hunter Bonspiels. You remember Wild Bill Hunter putting together some things like the TELUS Classic and an event on the ice at the West Edmonton Mall, etc. And that circuit provided an event that gave $40,000 first prize. But take a look at the Capital One Grand Slams. The money is modest. It's $25,000 to win. And back in the days of that famous Welton Beauchamp Classic tour stop in Ottawa, that was the $20,000 was the top prize there for a few years. That's just $5,000 off a slam title. But it's not just about money. The fact that the Grand Slam circuit managed to get itself into the Olympic qualifying process run by the CCA has been, a godsend for curling in general, because these guys not only need the qualifying points to make it to trials, but if you want to beat the best on any given day, you got to try and beat them up as much as you can regularly, right? You got to get used to playing these big guns over and over and over, and that's what happens at Grand Slams. And that's why you see some young guys like Mike McEwen, etc., really wanting to test themselves week in, week out against the best. Because if you ever get yourself to an Olympic trials competition, if you can make it to the final 8 or whatever it is, and if you can get hot, as we were just talking about, anyone can beat anyone.
And sometimes those teams like McEwen and Carruthers, it's fashionable to get in the Curling Zone forums and mock the teams that go to their first Grand Slam and go 0-5. But eventually those teams learn how to win at that level. The ones that stick with it. It's not an easy road. But interesting point about the money. I think the Capital One Cup, they need to promote the dollars, how much money it is a little better, figure that out. But what do you think of the notion of a winner-take-all Grand Slam? $100,000 to the winner, 0 to runner-up.
Well, geez. I mean,
I'll
put my foot in it. I just stated that these guys play these slams for reasons more than money. Okay, so I'd like to think that, if qualifying points were involved, it'd be an automatic. But even if not, if these guys were well taken care of during a 5 or 6 day
exactly.
event, if they're treated like royalty, which is what happens now, both on the slam circuit and in major national events in Canada like the Brier, etc. I can't see why they wouldn't do it, because again, if you want to beat the best, you got to play against the best. It would certainly be an experiment that everyone would be on board to try once, because something like that still runs against what's deep in the blood of a competitive curler. Even at the opening level, a competitive curler takes a look at the qualifying money to make the 8, right?
Yeah.
And then they backtrack and say, okay, what do we got to do to break even on this trip, this tournament? So it all starts with that. You wouldn't just be taking away qualifying money, you'd be taking away runner-up money. That's quite an interesting concept.
Well, here's what I like about it, just for one event, and I think you'd have to have it limited to teams that had won something and won a bunch of money, so it's not like guys are coming into it empty-handed. But where I think the Capital One Grand Slam Series fails to capture the imagination of people at times is that second place isn't as rotten as it is at other events, like the Olympic trials, like the Brier, where second place is really lousy. The difference between first and second at a Capital One Grand Slam is significant, but not huge. Until, this Players' Championship with Randy Furby's team, that was big, and that made it a lot more exciting. So I just like to see one event where second place is crushing.
That is really interesting, Dean. I may have to forward this directly to Capital One. Are you okay with that?
Well, I think I've probably, I don't know if I have let them know my feelings on this before, and I've talked to other curlers about it. I just think it's... I wouldn't want to throw a shot for $100,000 versus 0, but I'd sure like to see somebody do it. And I think I think that's the only place where I think it would give the Capital One Grand Slam Series just a little bit of a boost in that area where it misses just a bit of the drama that the other events have. But
well, I wonder if we'll ever get to the $1 Million Rock. Hey, I mean that's just add a few more zeros to what you were talking about. But are we ever going to have the $1 million draw out of the button of a competition where it might not necessarily be winner take all, but if $1 million is your top prize, then heck, on paper you're not going to care about coming in second, right? You got to assume you're going to get something decent.
Yeah, you mentioned the McEwens and the Carruthers of the world, guys who and Jason Gunlickson's team, sort of Gunlickson / Carruthers, now Gunlickson. But do you think after this Olympic cycle we'll start to see some of these guys win consistently, or are Kevin Martin, Glenn Howard, Randy Fry, are they just going to keep playing till they're 60?
I don't know if they will, to be honest with you. I hear rumors that some of the younger guys on tour are actually planning on hanging them up sooner than later, spending some more time with their families. I mean, that might not be a permanent retirement, but they might take an entire Olympic cycle off. And, once you do that, how strong is the call to get you back into it? You might forget what you said 4 years earlier when you hung up the boots. Someone from a really prominent young-ish team told me that he thinks the CCA are going to be shocked by the number of retirements coming sooner than later. So, if guys like McEwen can stick around, if they've got decent jobs that allow them to compete as much as they can, they might find themselves just jumping into holes left by Kerry Burnick, who I can just about guarantee you is over and done like dinner for the second time if he doesn't win the trials, make it to the trials, and then win in December. And that could trickle down the line into women's ranks, too.
Well, you're right. The difficult age, late 20s, a guy who's put a lot into curling starts to worry that other parts of his life are lacking, and does look around and at maybe friends who aren't curling as much and wonder if he's made the right decisions. I do think it's a tough balance to find. I hope guys can find it, because I think your life's a little less rich if you walk away from curling, if you're that good a player.
Well, you mentioned Martin, too, and there's an interesting one. We ran a quote of his to a local media guy in, the Curling News quote section. And for the first time, he gave a hint that he might actually be able or willing to stick around to go for Sochi. He's pretty much hedged his bets from what he's talked about his future plans are every year. But he kind of left the door open. And, there's the model right there. There's a veteran who's been around a long time, who's in his 40s. He's playing skip position, and he's got 3 serious workhorses, killing themselves with the brushes in front of them. And that has proven to be a combination that, can't really be beaten. We've seen it for a long time. No one thinks Randy Ferbey maybe is that old, but his team was prototypical at the start of this century doing that.
And you look at a guy like Glenn Howard, who actually seems to have improved from, say, 38 to 46.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of that is confidence at the skip position. People who remember the earlier part of this decade when it was the Mitchell brothers at front end for himself and Richard. Glenn wasn't able to win that one game, it seemed, Like he was either getting knocked out in a final or a semifinal, sometimes a quarterfinal. He just couldn't quite put it together to win the big game and the big event. But now, my God, how many spiels did he win in a row this season? Something like 7 or 8?
Yeah, well, 5 right off the bat at the start of the season, right? Wasn't it?
Yeah.
With the one without him, that team won. But all right, George, we finished with the run back. Unless you have something else you want to chip in here.
No, fire it at me. I can take it.
All right. Apart from Annette Norberg and Nicholas Eden, the seeming decline of curling in Sweden.
Problematic.
Yeah, I don't get it. It's always are they? Is it? Do they? I mean, how many clubs are in Sweden? Are they just?
There's a small to decent amount. I'd say in the 20s, no more than that. But Roger Schmidt said it best in a column in the Curling News that Sweden had put all their eggs in one basket, and that was the Lindholm basket. He was funded for so many years. All the attention was paid to him, nothing to the grassroots in front of him. And when he retires, admittedly, that was like at a shocking time, 1 or 2 years out, I guess, from an Olympic Games. No one expected that. There was nobody there to pick up the slack. And you get one kind of upset win in the Swedish Championship, and then you're off at the Europeans, which is, of course, your country's qualifier for the World, and you underperform. Boom, just like that. Too many eggs in one basket.
Former World Junior Champion Chris Ply is now the alternate for American John Schuster's rink.
I like him. Good kid, great curler, funny. A bit of a paradox. Seems to really, really, really love the sport, but then he'll make a comment that, he's got other things in his life going on. I think that could be a great addition to generally a pretty young and untested team that surprised a lot of people, winning the U.S. right to go to the Olympics.
I played them in the challenge round. I actually thought they did look like they were coming into their own, and wasn't surprised when they won. But the interesting choice of Plies is that I think he's the model for an alternate in that he could play just about anywhere. Well, exactly. He can play anywhere. He could skip that team. He could play anywhere on it. So
yeah, they'll be ready for anything with a fellow like that.
Women from Finland who blog about curling. Where do you find these Finnish women?
Who finds these people? Where do they come from?
What are you doing? Finnish women who blog, and you've managed to track them down.
Well, Katja's pretty well known on the social circuit, and although I work pretty hard in my days with the World Curling Federation, you can't help but see what's going on in terms of the social side of the sport, right, Dean?
You can't help but see it, right? It's just you can't help
it. Exactly. And here's an opportunity to let some guest bloggers add their own dimension to what is generally considered, I think, to be a pretty good blog. At least that's the comments I get at the Curling News. And we might have more experimentation in this regard in the future.
I will say, George, the curlingnews.blogspot.com is a fine blog you put out. And I know it's a place I go to for information and the inside scoop that I certainly don't provide on this show. Rick Mercer tries wheelchair curling.
Funny man. Watching it behind the scenes is different from what you see, obviously, on the screen when it gets put together. But he's even having fun when the cameras aren't rolling and he's setting up the shots. Just a great guy. And those who paid attention to the story on the blog might have missed the fact that he did a whole series of Paralympic sports and appearances in Vancouver earlier in the season. In fact, he seems to have a soft spot for Paralympic sport in general. I think that's great.
Curling groups on Facebook.
Not enough of them. We need more.
We need more. There's one every day.
I know. It's
insane.
It's starting to get a little bit silly. I think we should try and consolidate maybe into just 100 groups. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm going to less Facebook for a little while, I think. The big Capital One Grand Slam event to be held in Mississauga in October.
Well, I might have to actually visit that one, seeing it's about 50 minutes from my house. But it's a slam with a twist. As people may or may not know, there's only 4 Canadian teams involved. The rest are all internationals who either have qualified or are on their way to qualifying for the Olympic Games. So maybe this is, something for those who complain that the Grand Slams have become more and more Canadian, and in some cases, like the Players' Championship, are exclusive and don't include international teams.
Well, I think I hope the Torontonians support. I think that on paper the lineup of teams there, the curling will be better than in Vancouver.
Absolutely, I think there's some people who are disappointed that it's not going to be downtown at the Air Canada Centre as originally planned. But with the economy, I certainly am not surprised that it had to make a move. I mean, it's the little things that impress people in the city of Toronto, particularly since there's a garbage strike going on right now, and they're talking about a booze store strike starting soon.
A what door strike?
Yeah, booze stores. The Liquor Control Board of Ontario is apparently going to go on strike.
Oh, nice. Well,
and everybody's stocking up. So the point is, free parking in Mississauga, everybody. The parking rates downtown at the ACC would have killed you, but there's free parking in Mississauga.
Well, yeah, and I think it was overly ambitious to be at the Air Canada Centre. But so I'm glad they moved it myself, and I'd also like to see them privatize liquor sales in Ontario. But
me too.
I can't believe they have the LCBO stores with your shoddy collection of wines. But nonetheless, go up to
they are negotiating down to the wire, and I'm sure even if it begins, it'll be over by the time your listeners hear this.
I go to my cottage every year and have to bring as much wine up as I can, so I'm not drinking your plonk. Anyways, Glenn Howard's raised double-double against Joel Jordison's Saskatchewan team at the Tim Hortons Brier. That's
the shot that curling needed. Already we had a pretty good Brier, impressing a lot of people, great curling, and then a shot like that comes out of the sleeve. Curling needs more of that. We need more of that stuff exposed on television, and that's the kind of thing that you can whip around on a blog to some friends, and people will start gossiping. Same thing that happened in the Olympic final for Mark Nichols' big run back against the Finns, if you remember.
Yep. And I don't think that they called that one sick, though, on SportsCenter like they did Glenn's. But I think we should all extend our thanks to Joel Jordison for leaving him that shot, actually, too. I think he's the hero who's not noted well enough in that.
No, and you can't forget people like that. They have to hang their head and shake a hand, and they've just seen a defeat jump up out of nowhere. But you need that. Maybe I should do a story on great runner-ups of major championship events.
I think that is a good story, especially the persistent runner-ups. I got Eugene Ritzik coming up on the show. I interviewed him. It'll be posted shortly, and it'll be posted before this one, I'm afraid, George. But I had Eugene on. He's a runner-up in the Brier, runner-up in a lot of events. Got a lot of good runner-ups out there. Part of the cruel nature of curling. Hey, speaking of handshakes, what about the ridiculous forum on curlingzone.com about foregoing handshakes before a game because of swine flu concerns?
All I can say is it's summer, clearly.
Exactly. Boy,
there's not much else to talk about.
Wow, what a waste of time that was. There he is. Kelly Scott cuts lead. Renee Simons replacing her with Jackie Armstrong.
It's an interesting one. I mean, from the quotes I read, it didn't even sound like Renee played particularly poorly in the last year or maybe year and a half or, whatever time frame they were discussing. It's just, it felt like they needed to do something. And if you got to do something, I guess you don't remove yourself to skip, right?
You could change your socks.
That's a good one.
Practice differently. Whatever the case. I think teams are free to do what they want to do. That's for sure, and that happens more and more. It does seem you're a former lead. It seems like the lead is usually the one to get blamed for all the team's woes. Yeah,
and I remember, I think, in our discussion last year, this point came up because wasn't there an unusual or odd amount of leads?
Oh, yes.
Being turfed and bounced around various teams?
Yeah, they're it seems to be a tenuous position at best. But, from Jamie Korab, on again, off again with Brad, and Corey Naharney with Kerry Burtnick, and a few others. Right. So there you go. All right, George, we've come to the end of this conversation, and I want to ask you... advertisers, sponsors, plugs. I know you've left your position with the World Curling Federation, hoping to focus a bit more time on the curling news and some other things. Anything else you want to tell me?
No, Toronto's going for the Pan Am Games, hosting in 2015. Opponents are Bogota and Colombia and Lima and Peru. Of course, these are summer games, and there will be no curling involved, but would like to see Toronto win one after striking out at a couple of Olympic Games in the past. In terms of the curling news, all I'll ask is that people support the curling news. It's not a free publication. You may see a couple copies around at your club, but we do like to send it to subscribers ahead of the clubs and in a nice poly bag, first-class mail. So please head to thecurlingnews.com and give us your support.
And I would add to that, George, on your behalf, is that people who used to get the curling news and then maybe have stopped might not realize that these days with printing and so forth, the news in it is fresher than it's been in the past, maybe say 5-10 years ago.
Absolutely, and you were commenting on the blog, and we're quite proud of that product. It is free, but we make sure that what's in the curling news is not in the blog and vice versa. We think it's a 1-2 punch that everybody should go for. One costs you just a little bit of money, consider it your civic duty to the sport of curling, and the other is absolutely free. You
and every other publisher, right, trying to figure out the balance between what's free on the web and what's on paper.
It's amazing. It's amazing what's out there. I'm reading now some documents from some ex-New York Times workers who think they have solved the conundrum, but in the same breath, you look at major news organizations just bleeding from their product that they've had since the 1800s, and they cannot figure out how to get through to someone who thinks that something should be free, and that, unfortunately, is the nature of your average web surfer these days. Yeah, we're way off curling here, but, I'm a big newspaper fan and a New York Times reader here, but I actually now get the Times delivered on the weekend, and I read it online during the week, although my wife does buy it on her way into Manhattan. But, it's a real conundrum for them. The ones that made their websites too good almost face the biggest challenge. That's right. So, anyways, that's way off curling, but we'll wrap it up there, George. Have a good summer, and I'm sure I hope we'll see you next year at some events. I'm going to be at maybe a few more events, and we'll catch up again. I look forward to catching up with you, Dean, and congrats again to the Curling Show for producing such great product. All right. Thanks, George. That's George Karrys on The Curling Show. Even if you just heard me say that I need a break from Facebook, I still hope you'll join The Curling Show group. Hope you're enjoying the summer, and thanks for listening. Enjoy the pudding.